Talk Live.
Welcome to the Free Talk Cast, brought to you by our supporters over on Patreon. You can find that at patreon.com/LRNFM if you want to join us there. That's the best way to show your support for the podcast and some of the other projects that we get up to. That's patreon.com/LRNFM. I actually don't have the information in front of me for this week's supporters, so I'm going to have to pull that up later and add that in after the fact, but that's not a big deal. But thank you to that person, whoever you are, and thank you to all of our supporters over there at patreon.com/LRNFM. A sad update. Now, last week, I ended up having something to do on Tuesday nights, and then Mark ended up being Mark and unavailable for me to record the podcast with him, as Mark tends to do.
He's a busy man.
Well, he messaged me today making me aware that he's available for the next 2 weeks to do a show remotely, which may or may not actually happen. So I told him to be there, to be available Monday night for us to actually do an episode of Free Talk Live together. There's like a 50-50 chance he's actually going to be there. And there's a 75-25 chance against the fact that he'll have a tech issue that will prevent him from doing the show. So we'll see.
It's the thought that counts.
Yeah, we'll see how all of that actually goes. But as a result, I also, Nikki, I didn't actually show it to you, but because I don't know where I put it, but I received all of the letters that I wrote my best friend when I was in prison.
I did see this on Facebook, yes.
And so I thought it would be neat to go back through and look at what I had written from within prison a year before when I did last week's podcast. So I just sort of reflected on that and had the letter from August the 22nd or whatever it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, weird.
Yeah. So like I wrote this a year ago in federal prison, and here's here's me today talking about what I wrote a year ago in federal prison.
Yeah.
So, and that was what I started out doing, but then I started talking about the prison experience as a whole and some of the people who I met there. And I specifically mentioned this I called him a kid, and I'm still going to keep referring to him as a kid, even though he's not that much younger than I am, named Jaime Diaz. I don't think I said his actual last name then, but it doesn't matter now because I found out today that he's dead. Allegedly died of a drug overdose on August the 24th, which I believe would be the day that I recorded said podcast. No, that would have been Saturday. That would definitely not have been the day that I recorded it, but just a few days after.
Yeah, but it was still interesting that you were thinking of
Yeah.
him. I don't know. I think that there might be some sort of energetic or spiritual significance there.
I tend to think so, right? Because he was mentioned heavily in that particular podcast because he was under commissary restriction. I had taught this guy how to play the guitar when I was in prison. And he was obviously bisexual to me, and a few other people picked up on that, and he very clearly had a crush on me, but it was never going to happen because he was like 3.5 feet tall, and like I'm twice that height. He wasn't really 3.5 feet tall, but he was really short. Super sweet guy, though, and really nice. Like I said, I taught him how to play the guitar. He was on commissary restriction because he had failed a drug test, so they wouldn't let him buy anything off of commissary, or he was restricted to some amount. I don't remember what the rules were. But as a result, I gave him almost all of my stuff when I left federal prison. This was the guy who, as I was leaving and being escorted by a guard, a CO, I asked her when I saw him if I could give him a hug, to which she said, "Oh, yeah, I don't see anything," and she turned her head to look the other way. So I was close with this guy. We were friends, and he's dead. He died on August the 24th of allegedly a drug overdose. Now, he wasn't a heroin user. So I suspect it was K2 that killed him, and either an overdose or or he got a bad batch of that.
Yeah.
So, like,
I mean, they're putting fentanyl in everything. Like, seriously, like cocaine, probably K2. Also, I don't know too much about the K2 market these days, but yeah, it's everywhere, and it's really scary because it's killing a lot of people. Because most people that aren't actively using fentanyl or heroin don't have a tolerance to it. So even the littlest bit can kill people.
Isn't that crazy, too? I've heard the same thing about fentanyl being put in cocaine.
Yeah,
And
it just doesn't make sense because it's like an upper versus a downer. I don't know why people would even do that. It doesn't make any sense.
I don't know why people would put fentanyl in anything. And this is one of the reasons that Ross Ulbricht, who is currently serving 2 life sentences in federal prison, saved people's lives.
Absolutely.
That shit that you're getting on the street probably contains fentanyl. And the stuff that you get on the darknet market probably does not. And if it does, then they will tell you in advance that it contains fentanyl because they have an actual rating system and a marketplace and reputations to protect, whereas your neighborhood drug dealer doesn't necessarily have them to that extent. It's like Amazon or eBay, rather, for drugs.
Yeah.
If you go to buy from, and I'm not encouraging you to buy drugs online on the darknet, but if you were to go and do that, and you saw this dealer with like 500 transactions, 500 sales, and no ratings whatsoever, well, that guy's killing people. Shop from someone else. But you can also send your drugs off to get tested and other wonderful things like that, which you should certainly do. And you can get fentanyl test strips for free on the internet.
Mm-hmm. So I think those are illegal in some states, actually. Isn't that hard to believe?
You're kidding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having a testing kit is illegal in some states.
But fentanyl is getting put in everything, not just
But
narcotics.
their solution is, no, just don't do drugs, as if that works.
Well, it clearly doesn't work. People
Clearly,
are out there dying. And I don't know if Jaime died because there was fentanyl in whatever it was that he consumed. But these are things that could be avoided.
Absolutely.
And they should be avoided. And Ross Ulbricht and darknet marketplaces saved people's lives by giving them a safe and reliable way to acquire drugs that they were going to do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the argument that a lot of people have that doesn't make any sense to me. They seem to think that if these darknet marketplaces exist, it will somehow encourage people to buy drugs. And I don't understand that line of thinking because teaching people to stop, drop, and roll doesn't encourage them to catch on fire, right? And we see the same thing in a lot of prisons. Like federal prison refuses to provide people with condoms under the assumption that it encourages people to have sex.
Oh my gosh, that is so dumb. And this is human nature. People are going to do what they're going to do.
Yeah.
They're going to do drugs and they're going to have sex.
They absolutely are.
So, and that was the same thing, like a lot of like Christians and Catholics are like, no, just this Puritan, like, oh, no sex before marriage and you won't get STDs and you won't get pregnant. But as a result, they're not teaching their children about STDs or how you get pregnant. Yep. And as a result, those kids are still going to have sex just like all the other teenagers, except now they're getting STDs and getting pregnant. Whereas if you teach your children safe sex and precautionary measures, they will understand those things and they have the opportunity to be more careful. And the same goes for drugs as well.
We see this exact thing in the United States. You can look at the data. It's widely available. Mississippi has the highest teen pregnancy rate in the country. They also have the highest rates of syphilis and gonorrhea.
Wow.
And I think a few other STDs, probably chlamydia is in there as well, in the nation. They have the highest high school dropout rate, the lowest literacy rate, and the highest teen pregnancy rate, which I think I mentioned, the highest STD rates, obviously. And all of this is because there is no sex education in the state of Mississippi. The only education they have is abstinence education, which is exactly what it's that Puritan nonsense. So, well, no, don't have sex. They do tell you about the dangers of STDs. But that's what they focus on as they're teaching people about sex. They use the STDs as a reason why you should avoid sex.
Yeah, not like, hey, you should use condoms.
Yeah.
And get tested and go to the doctor and whatever else.
Right. And it's not working as a way of getting people to avoid sex. Very clearly, people are still having sex, especially in Mississippi. And now they're having, as you mentioned, teen pregnancies and STDs and other things because no one ever told them or no one ever drilled into their heads, because they probably have heard of condoms, but no one has ever drilled into their heads the importance of having safe sex versus not safe sex.
Well, I'm also wondering, there might be an age limit on buying condoms in the store. I'm not sure.
Is there?
I'm honestly not sure.
Well, I know that
but I know like some places like Planned Parenthood and then also some sex education classes in high schools will provide condoms and they'll give the students condoms.
There was I think the Department of Health Services or something along those lines in the county that I lived in Mississippi where you could go and they would give you a bag of condoms. And that was what I did in high school. They never asked me for my ID or anything, which was great because if people are having sex and they have a need for condoms, the, that's all you need to know, right? And if you're a good educator or a good member of your community and you have these condoms available to give people who request them, then just give them the damn condoms and let them do their thing and be
Well, that's
happy.
encouraging them to have sex, though.
I understand, I get that. I have heard that argument, at least. I can't honestly say that I get it. For the same reason that it's a good idea to teach people to stop, drop, and roll. Look, growing up in Mississippi, I heard stop, drop, and roll way more often than I heard use a condom.
Yeah.
And I've never caught on fire.
So,
but I've definitely had sex.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I think people are more likely to get an STD than they are to, burst into flames spontaneously.
Now, that's not to say that people don't catch on fire.
Yeah, I mean,
They
it's good.
do.
Stop, drop, and roll. It's good.
Yeah.
Good to know. Fire safety is definitely also important.
But I imagine when you're on fire, it's very hard to remember stop, drop, and roll. I don't know that for sure, but I would
I've never been
speculate,
on
but
fire.
I
I don't
haven't
know.
either. And I wasn't there the year at Pork Fest. I think I was there, but I was too new, so I wasn't around the event when someone was on LSD and they had the brilliant idea to do a front flip over a bonfire.
Oh, yeah.
And like none of his friends around were like, hey, maybe you should sit the fuck back down and not do what you're planning to do.
Yeah.
But the result was that he was rushed to the hospital with like second and third degree burns because like have friends around if you're unused to LSD and have good friends around because any one of those people should have been like, hey, that's stupid. Do it tomorrow if you insist on doing it. But
Do it
maybe
tomorrow.
maybe just don't do it, right?
Yeah.
But at least the guy knew, I guess, to stop, drop, and roll. So, I mean, I'm not saying that he was like, well, I'll be okay because I know how to...
They taught me this in public school.
Right, yeah, they focused on this.
Remember, if you're going to do a backflip over the fire, wear a condom.
I didn't have any, even the abstinence education thing didn't exist when I went to high school. However, my ex-wife's little sister brought home the pamphlets and shit that they gave her. And I probably still have photos of them somewhere because it was just horrifying, fear-mongering nonsense. It wasn't at all about, hey, your hormones are going to be out of control and you need to know what to do in these situations. It was all, no, have no sex, otherwise you'll get HIV and you'll die. And that clearly doesn't work. People's hormones take over and then they get in that situation and they don't know what to do. The importance of beating stop, drop, and roll into people's heads is so that it becomes instinctual. If they ever catch on fire, they don't have to stop and think about it. They just know stop, drop, and roll. And the experience of being on fire, it probably overwhelms most of their brain. I say this as someone who has actually escaped from a burning building. I was at work the night that the building on Main Street caught on fire. And I always had this idea that if my house caught on fire, I would be able to get my cats out of there, maybe grab a guitar or something the most important to me, get my cats out, all that. No, none of that's happening. When the flames went from being just slightly out of control to holy shit, everyone out of the building right this second. In the span of, you're not finding a cat in that time frame. Like if your house catches on fire, good luck, cats. You're on your own.
Yeah, it's scary. I would hope that their natural instincts, like if you leave a door open or something, would be to flee.
I would hope so. But what I was getting at, I guess, is that you don't think when those kinds of situations
Well, it's
are
very
on you.
fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
Like your instincts kicked in and you just do like whatever life-saving measure needs to be done for yourself. It's kind of like all men for themselves.
I did get my employees out of the building. So like I had enough in my head to be able to focus on that and to do that, make sure that everyone had gotten out safely. But yeah, it's very much fight or flight. And you see the contrast of this where my instinct was to get the hell out of the building. But another person's instinct was to sit and cower. And
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good.
No. Well, I guess she chose fight, I guess, whereas
Well, that's
I
not
chose
really
flight.
fighting. That's more like a trauma response almost.
Maybe. I don't know why she ended up doing that, but she was rescued. She did suffer from smoke inhalation damage, but she was rescued and, everything is fine. There was a cat that died in this fire, but that was because no one knew the cat was there because you weren't allowed to have pets in that building.
Oh yeah, it was an apartment building also.
Yeah, so no one had any idea, and they probably couldn't have saved the cat anyway, but they didn't even know to look for one until way after the fact. So that
sad. Yeah, we did a lot of those sort of fire drills when I was a nurse working in hospitals and different facilities like that. And a lot of the times in hospitals, you have bed-bound patients, and it is physically impossible to evacuate. I mean, some people are on life support, right? It is physically impossible to evacuate the building. So there's other measures like closing the doors, like close all the doors to the patients' rooms. And then a lot of large buildings like that will have fire doors that will automatically, if the fire alarm is going off, they'll automatically close.
Yeah.
And that is to try to contain the fire as much as possible until the fire department gets there. So
I never considered that. That's got to be a horrific thing to have to train for. Mm-hmm. And of course, like once that moment actually, we didn't have any fire drills at this place of employment. We did have a lot of fire drills in prison, because they are required to have a certain quota each year, and they didn't do them last year. And the result of that was that in December, we had like 14 fire drills in the span of about 6 days. And this is very frustrating because it's December in Massachusetts, not the warmest place. And they had one of these fire drills at 6 o'clock in the morning, one of them at 6 o'clock at night. It was so suspicious that I thought that they were going around like planting some sort of military testing equipment. Like, let's see what happens if we put, because we would have a fire drill and then like 3 hours later, there would be another one. And then the next day there would be another one.
And that totally defeats the purpose of a fire drill. It's supposed to happen, periodically, like maybe once a month or every other month, whatever, so you can prepare for it.
Yeah, but they had a yearly quota. And so they crammed all of that yearly
quota. They were like,
quota.
right, we forgot about the fire drills. It's December.
Yep, that was exactly it. And, of course, none of them were effective. And it was really stupid because you just went out back and you sat there and you waited. And then they said, all clear, everyone back in. And you would just go back in. It was the dumbest thing. Plus, they would announce it in advance. So when the fire drill
So it's not a fire drill at all. It's like, hey, by the way, we're going outside in 15.
Yeah,
grab your coat.
Already dressed. Everyone's waiting, going, when are they going to do this? And then suddenly they announce it.
So dumb.
Dude, it's monstrously stupid. And of course, none of that would have helped because we all went like politely out the back door. And that's not at all the way it would have happened if the building was actually on fire. Every single one of those emergency exits would be ripped open. People would be smashing out windows and going out of them if that was the nearest thing to do. Especially these inmates. They're not going to die to protect your stupid BOP window, nor should they. So that's the frustrating things that I've dealt with in the past in regard to the BOP and just fires in general. But it was a jarring experience to be reminded that when those moments happen, there is no high-functioning part of your brain, and you end up running just on instinct in exactly the same way that teens end up running on instinct when their hormones are overwhelming them. That was the point. That was the way I was trying to connect those two things together.
Horny teenagers and scared people in a fire.
Yeah. So it's good to know what to do when you have a fire. But you've got to recognize that unless the training is just drilled into your head regularly and you have it like down pat without having to think about it, and that's the point of the STD thing and the condom thing, is to teach people to get it in their heads so they don't have to overwhelm their hormones. It's like, no, this is default, right? You are putting on protection and that's the end of it, because their hormones are going crazy. I remember what it was like to be a teenager dealing with that nonsense, and then condoms are no one's favorite thing, least of all teenagers, but they're important, and it's important to teach kids to use them. But Mississippi, of course, doesn't do that. And you can look up the stats if you want. I don't have them in front of me, but just look up Mississippi teen pregnancy rates. They're the worst in the nation. STD.
Is Mississippi just the worst in the nation for everything?
Just about, yeah.
Because it's like the highest illiteracy, highest high school dropout.
Yeah.
Most STDs, most teen pregnancy. What else?
I'm sure there's a few exceptions, but if you rank all 50 states from like worst to best, Mississippi is going to be the worst in probably every category.
You shared something on Facebook about the worst and best places to be gay.
Yeah.
And I think Mississippi was probably pretty far down.
I think
on
it
that
was.
List. I don't remember specifically, but
I don't remember either, and I stopped paying attention to that because, one, it was just some random thing I saw and shared, and people acted like it was way more serious than it actually was. And I got frustrated because so many people just argued from their personal experience. Well, I live in Florida, and I don't see any homophobia, so this must be wrong.
Says this straight white male. Right? Okay.
And what's amazing about that was one person actually commented, "There's no violence against gays in Florida. That's nonsense." Like, dude, the Pulse nightclub shooting happened in Florida. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
But, for some reason in his head, that didn't count as anti-gay violence. And, like, I get it.
I mean, that's like the most anti-gay violence. That's like someone is blowing up this nightclub because there's a bunch of gay people in it. Yeah. That's exactly what that is. That is exactly gay violence. Like, I don't know what more could somebody do?
And the counter was something along the lines of, well, that happened almost a decade ago. Well, okay. I thought that things were a little better than they really were. I have this book called Far From the Tree by Andrew Solomon, which I mention all the time because if you're going to be a parent, that's the one book you should read to prepare yourself for the possibility that your kid is going to be different from you. Your kid might be gay or disabled or trans or might be a criminal or whatever, but one way or another, your child has a decent chance of being different from you. And a lot of parents view that as a failure when that happens, like somehow I failed to protect my kid from being gay.
I mean, if you can't love your child because they're gay, then yeah, you are a failure.
That's a point that he brings up repeatedly in that book, and it seems to work a lot of times with parents who are like, I just want my kid to be happy, but my kid is trans. I was like, well, okay, but your kid is happy after transitioning. Why does it bother you so much that you put your child's happiness aside for that? Anyway, it's a really good book, and I don't remember why I brought it up just now. Oh, it highlights some stories in the trans chapter. The chapters are like 150 pages, by the way. There's only like 9 chapters, and it's a massive book that even shocked me being from Memphis, Tennessee, and Mississippi because almost all of the stories it mentions are from the South. Mm-hmm. And there's one story of a school, a PTA, basically, other parents at this kid's school calling and leaving voice messages threatening to rape and kill the child because they're trans. And it's like, hold on, your boyfriend is calling this child and leaving a voice message saying that he's going to teach your son what it means to be a woman because your son your son is now your daughter. It's all very confusing, and I phrased it all very badly.
But that's wrong for so many reasons.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so you're just like, do you rape every woman? And do you usually harass and threaten children?
It's absolutely crazy. And that story was from like 2016.
Okay, so yeah, pretty recent.
Yeah. Another story, it may have been the same story, reported that they moved out of this neighborhood into a different neighborhood, but because of his job, the father had to stay behind. So what the neighborhood did was they killed his dog and
what?
Yeah, I don't remember
because his kid was gay or trans,
and they like ripped out his entrails and like nailed it to a lamppost. It's just horrific.
It's like how I don't know how those people are like, yeah, we're in the right.
Right.
We're the good guys.
We're
the good guys.
And what's jarring about this is that like this was not something that happened in the 80s or 90s or even the 50s or the 60s. These are stories from 2010, 2016. This book just came out, and he interviewed the people who experienced these very things. And I didn't think that kind of shit still happened. Like,
no, that's crazy.
My experience as a trans person in the South wasn't great, but it was certainly nothing like that. I'm horrified to think that these things still happen, and not just to trans kids, but to kids in general.
Yeah,
like I can't imagine how much hatred it takes to motivate a person to, like, there were good Samaritans in this neighborhood who would tell the mother, "Hey, you've got to get this kid out of here. People are planning to hurt your kid." And like every part of this is fucking psychotic.
It's like some KKK shit, like burning crosses in people's yards.
It is. And it goes on to this very day, presumably, unless things have changed in the last 8 years, and they probably have not.
I think a lot of stuff has kind of gotten worse because there is more trans children. Like, it's just more of a thing these days.
It is.
And I'll be honest, I think a lot of the teenagers who are exploring gender identity and sexuality, or maybe it is a phase. I think that is kind of like some of the influx.
I think so.
But obviously there are some genuine trans human beings out there. And I think either way, like even if it is a child exploring their gender or exploring their sexuality, I just don't know why that is. Like, why does somebody else care, especially if it's not even their kid? It's not contagious.
The way someone put it to me once was that it's misogyny wrapped up in a different packaging. And especially their concern is men transitioning into women or boys transitioning into girls because they know how they look down on women. And they don't want their precious boy to go through that experience. And I don't know how much truth there is to that, but it does make sense from one particular aspect because it is almost always male to female people who are considered to be the problems. No one seems to give much of a fuck about female to male trans people.
Actually, there are more female to male trans people. There's a lot more. Absolutely. And I think maybe they just pass better. So people just don't, maybe they're less threatening or something. You know what I mean? Because there's a big men in the women's bathroom like that. And I do get if there is actually a weirdo in the women's bathroom, obviously that's an issue. I think most trans people are not in there to molest your kid, obviously, but no one seems to worry about female to male trans people in the bathroom or in any sort of public settings.
And they overlook the fact that their issue there is with lesbians, not trans people at all. Maybe that 30-year-old lesbian is going to, hit on your 14-year-old daughter in the bathroom, whatever. Most of the trans women I know are attracted to men, not women. Now, that's not universally true. I happen to be bisexual, and some of the other trans people I know are as well. But the vast majority of them that I met in my life are attracted to men.
Yeah.
So if they were going to be interested in anyone, they would find that person in the men's room, not the women's room. But their real concern, I think, is that lesbians exist. You're not trying to stop lesbians from using the bathroom with your 14-year-old daughter. Why are you trying to stop trans women who are into men? To me, that seems a little bit weird, and it seems like their actual issue is unidentified. They're blaming trans women for what is actually an issue of sexual attraction and the fact that there are women who are attracted to other women. But you mentioned trans men, that would be female to male people, having a much easier time passing. And also in my experience, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
I've known at least 2 trans men. I'm actually dating a trans man right now. And I would never have known that either of them were trans men.
Yeah.
Except that by being a trans person, I'm a little more sensitive.
You got trans star?
Yeah, I kind of do. Because when I first met the first trans man that I knew about, someone referred to him as he, and I was like, are we sure this is what that person wants to be called? Because I'm not convinced that's the case. I wasn't trying to say, hey, I don't think this person is a cis man.
Yeah, you weren't trying to out them or anything. You just wanted to make sure you're calling them the right thing.
Yeah, has anyone asked this person what they prefer to be called? Was basically what I was getting at. And it did turn out that this person was, in fact, a trans man. And I was like, yeah, I nailed that. I knew there was something up there.
Yeah.
But my current boyfriend, I never would have in a million years guessed that this dude was trans.
So I worked at a drug and alcohol rehab, and part of the admissions process is basically stripping people down to make sure they're not smuggling drugs or any contraband and then whatever.
Yeah.
So I had a patient in front of me, Ed, and I'm like, all right, whatever, doing the skin check. And I was shocked when that person did not have a penis. I was like, whoa. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I know this is so unprofessional. You passed so well. And of course it was a compliment to them. So he didn't care. He was like, thank you. But I was genuinely shocked. It really caught me off guard. Like, he looked like a biological man.
It helps trans men that a lot of the effects of testosterone are effectively irreversible, whereas not all of the effects of estrogen are irreversible. For example, when a male person goes through puberty, their shoulders widen, their voice drops. Those are the two big ones, right? And their jaw does something, I think it like squares out a bit or whatever.
Yeah.
Estrogen doesn't do the opposite. Like estrogen just seems to be like the default way that a body forms without the testosterone making the shoulders wide.
Yeah, because like women with something like PCOS, that would increase their like every woman has naturally occurring testosterone, but there are some stuff like PCOS, for example, is a disease.
What is that?
It's polycystic ovarian syndrome, and basically the ovaries have cysts on them that affects how the body is making sex hormones. So for whatever reason, they produce a lot more testosterone and they don't produce a lot of female sex hormones, progesterone and estrogen typically. So they'll get facial hair, and they'll just kind of look more masculine a lot of the time. So
interesting.
So yes, and it's kind of weird with women with PCOS because it does depend on like the severity of their PCOS. But I have seen women who it's like, yeah, they have a full on beard and it's just due to their disease.
And your body does change over time because of estrogen, but it takes a really long time, especially to combat a lifetime of testosterone. Like my shoulders are certainly not as square as they were a decade ago. Part of that could be because I've gotten older, and part of it could be because I've been on estrogen for 7 years. But the widening of the shoulders that occurs during puberty, that never really goes away. A lot of trans women seem to think that taking estrogen increases the pitch of their voice. It does not. And like I've seen these trans women saying this on social media. Well, I've started estrogen and now my voice is so much higher. No, it's not. You fucking crazy lunatic. It has no effect whatsoever on your voice.
Yeah, I mean, why do gay men have a different pitched voice? You know, it's just a different way of speaking. Yeah. It's just, I guess, a feminine way of speaking. Like I can't even explain that because I'm not a gay person, but
I can't either, but I've always been curious about that. It has to be intentional.
Yeah,
right?
like and that's my what I'm wondering. I don't know if it's forced, like just something that they're doing, or if it's just because I also know straight men who kind of have that type of talk.
Yeah,
and they're like, I'm not gay, I just sound like I am. So I think sometimes, but I don't know the correlation between liking men, and having a different pitched voice. I don't know.
I'm surprisingly ignorant of LGBT things. It wasn't until like 3 years ago that I even knew what Stonewall was. And it was Sophia Botha, I think her last name was Botha, who first mentioned Stonewall to me like in a message. I was like, what is that? And she's like, what do you mean? What is that? It was like the single biggest American event for LGBT rights in history. And I'm like, yeah, I've never heard of it.
I've never heard of that either.
It was apparently a bar in New York City frequented by a bunch of drag queens and other gay people.
That sounds familiar now, yeah.
And the cops got called, so they threw bricks.
Yeah,
at
it was
the
like
cops.
Like
hardcore, good for them.
I have heard of that. Well, now I can't think of that famous drag queen, but the famous drag queen was there, like one of the first drag queens in New York City.
Yeah. I had a book sent to me in prison about Stonewall, and I started reading it, and it was really good when it talked about these gay people and these trans people and these drag queens in their early childhoods and how they went about doing that in a society that didn't accept it. The vast majority of them they went to boarding schools where apparently gay sex is super common. And I wouldn't necessarily have assumed that until I read that book. I would have just assumed that it was, because I went to camp a lot, and like not all of them were Pray the Gay Away. I actually went to 3 summer camps that were not Pray the Gay Away camps. They were Christian camps, but they weren't Pray the Gay Away camps. And like I had a good time there, and there was no gay sex whatsoever.
So are these boarding schools that they're talking about all male?
Yes.
Boarding schools?
Yeah, there were girls at this camp, so maybe that was the factor.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't end up.
It's like the what do they say in prison? Like, oh, you're gay for the stay or whatever.
Yeah. That does seem to happen. Not in my personal experience, but the longer a person is in prison, the more interested they seemed to get.
They just become more open-minded.
Yeah, maybe. And their standards would lower a lot. And
I mean, more limited
Yeah.
options.
Like
they still have the same hormones.
every single female nurse we had, and granted, there were some really hot nurses there. One of them was just drop dead gorgeous brunette. Like, she was exactly my type. I'm like, man, we need to hook up when I get out of here. But obviously did not do that. Plus, I'm dating someone now anyway. But it's not all of them were that attractive, but that didn't matter when one of the female nurses came. Every single night, one of the nurses came. And when it was a female, the pill line was always 2 or 3 times longer, even if someone was just going there to check their
They're
weight.
like, we just want to look at her.
Yeah,
Oh my
it was
gosh.
exactly that. So, but that's prison having that effect on people. If you have a hot visitor, just forget it. Every guy there is going to be gawking at her and sneaking looks at her. One inmate had to have the staff and other inmates talk to him about him staring
Oh
too
my
hard
gosh.
at other visitors because they
It's
were
like
hot
you're
girls.
no.
Yeah,
A fight is about to erupt. Quit looking at this dude's girl.
But again, none of that would happen if they had allowed these people. Again, this was a camp, so it was very low security. If they had just allowed them to have some conjugal visits, like what would have been the harm?
Or I think part of prison reform could be prostitution. Like maybe getting some prostitutes,
That would help out a
some
lot.
taxpayer prostitutes.
The biggest things you could do to make prison better would be, one, provide the inmates with cats. Not one cat per inmate, but a prison in California did this, and what they found was that even the most violent inmate that they had just takes tremendously good care of their cat.
That's funny. There was another prison program. We talked about it on the show like several months ago, but they were training dogs.
Nice. Oh, we had that opportunity at Devon's, and they were trying to bring it back. You had to have more than 2 years remaining on your sentence, though, because you got to spend a lot of time with the dog and so
you
on.
need the commitment. Or
The reason no one did it was because this dick, and he was absolutely a dick, giant dick named Smith, was in charge of that particular program. And the way he handled it was, if you were one of the dog trainers, they tossed your cell, which means searching it, multiple times a week for contraband and other things. And the less you get tossed, the better. They can always find something to nail you with.
why would they do that?
Because he's a dick.
Oh, so it just
Yeah.
there was no real reason.
No, he was like,
Like,
well,
oh, you're going out, so maybe you'll smuggle drugs in or whatever.
well, they weren't even going out. They could walk the dog at any hour, which
Yeah.
was a huge benefit for people, because if they wanted to walk their
Oh,
dog...
so it sounds like they just, sorry to interrupt you, but it sounds like they just didn't want to deal with it. So they're like, if you do this, we're going to punish you, sort of thing.
You would think so, but no, they want the dog program to return, and they did everything they could short of taking commissary from us to try to push us into having the dogs return. So the staff really wants it back, but the guy who was in charge of it also happened to be a power-tripping dick. He's the education guy or recreation guy. I don't remember exactly what he did, but he didn't have the authority to just toss any random person's cell. But because they were working in his department, he did have the authority to toss them, and he abused it multiple times a week.
Okay.
And the result of that was that no inmate wanted to have anything to do with it. The dogs went away, and every time they try to bring it back now, all of the inmates who know better come to you and say, no, take your name off that list right now. We're not doing that. And
Damn.
that's why the dog program is probably never going to return. But cats would be good. And there were wild turkeys and geese and stuff at this facility.
Yeah,
So-
but that's just because it's rural, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, here's this is our wild turkey program.
We did have a cat that was adjacent to the property that we would feed at night. And one guy, Paul, would actually bring it into the building, and it would sleep with him. And so I got to pet a cat a lot until Paul left, at which point he came back on a motorcycle and took the cat, which is kind of fucked up because like that cat had been there for 10 years or so, and it belonged to all of the inmates. And he was just
Yeah.
like, no, I love this cat. And he would say, I wouldn't have survived this experience without this cat. This cat saved my life or whatever. It's like, well, that's great, dude. But what about the other people whose life was going to get saved by this cat? It's
Yeah.
very selfish of him to have done that.
Yeah, he could have just adopted a cat.
Yeah. But he didn't. He instead took that cat, and now Devon's has no cat. But cats are good for inmates. Allowing them to have Suboxone is a good thing. allowing them to have nicotine patches would equally be a good thing, or vapes.
I say just let them smoke. Who cares? You know what I mean? Like if they have family members, or if it's in canteen or something and they're buying it with their own money, I don't see what the issue is.
That's what I would.
You know?
I understand why they don't want them smoking, because a lot of cigarette smokers just throw cigarette butts down and it generates a lot of trash. But having a disposable
just have an
vape,
ashtray.
Yeah, that could work. But even a disposable vape that's, $20 on commissary, they'd have to buy one every single week or whatever. Even that would be totally sufficient. So just say, hey guys, don't vape, don't use this inside.
Yeah.
And obviously they would, but they're vaping inside anyway.
Yeah.
So that would be helpful. And if they don't want to do that, give them some nicotine patches. Those two things alone, those three things, prostitutes, cats, and nicotine, would make prison an experience not quite as miserable. And I understand that people want people to be miserable in prison, but that's misguided.
It's so messed up, because the point, like, is it a punishment or is it meant for reform? Because it seems like it's supposed to be for reform, but it only makes people, like, a lot of the times if someone goes to jail, especially if they're young, they will go back to jail. It creates this cycle of them continuously going back to jail. So obviously, and that is a very common trend.
Yep.
So obviously, whatever's happening in jail is making people worse, for lack of a better word.
This is one of the reasons they passed the sentencing reduction thing last year, which I filed a motion for sentence reduction under this new guideline thing. They created a 0 criminal history category because they have learned that a person on their first offense is not likely to offend a second time.
Oh, but it's those people who are like, once the second time,
it's that second one, and that's when recidivism just skyrockets. And that makes sense.
See that.
Because a lot of people who are there as first-time offenders are people like me, or people who committed identity theft or just sold some drugs to someone. They're not career criminals, and they have no desire to be. So they did create that new 0 level category. But the better thing would just be to actually rehabilitate people. But as you mentioned, that's supposed to be one of the goals, to segregate, to rehabilitate, and to punish. Those are supposed to be the primary goals of prison. You want to separate the murderers and the rapists out there from the rest of society. And you want to punish them for what they did. And you want to rehabilitate them so that they don't do those sorts of things again. To that end, the prison does have a number of education programs, but they're all bullshit.
Yeah.
They have a GED program and a Spanish GED program, and those things are good, but what good is a GED to someone on the outside? There needs to be some sort of actual job training program. Teach these people how to weld. Teach them how to get their CDL, how to drive a truck. And they do have a CDL program at this facility, but it doesn't work, and it's probably never actually going to come back. If you want people to be productive members of society, that's what you have to do. You have to give them a reason to be productive and give them a means to be productive, because a lot of these people are from poor families and had no resources and no avenues for progress while growing up and getting older.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people, and I don't really think that selling drugs should be, to me, that's not a crime.
But agreed. It's just giving someone a product that they happen to want.
Yeah, exactly. But to some people, I mean, that is technically against the law in almost every state. Yeah. And a lot of people don't have the resources to make a good income. And they've learned from either friends or family members that selling drugs is extremely lucrative. So that is it's literally a business for them.
It is. So legalize that. That would help out a lot. Allow these people to sell things to other consenting adults in a safe and effective way, such as with things like the Silk Road and other darknet marketplaces. On the street, if people could actually establish these storefronts and establish reputations, the world would be safer. There's a reason that CVS isn't getting in trouble for putting fentanyl in the aspirin.
Yeah.
And that reason is that there's accountability there. The open market has a lot of accountability that just doesn't exist in the black market. And the beauty of some of the darknet marketplaces were that they brought that black market into the light of the rest of society. It gave them that accountability that is sorely missing. But those are the things that I think we should do to improve society. Give people in prison cats, prostitutes, and nicotine, and probably some drugs too, and legalize drugs. Get rid of the drug war. Don't actually even legalize drugs. Just get rid of the drug war. Just stop putting people in prison. Stop ruining their lives for selling things that you don't want them to have. Maybe teach your kids not to buy that thing, and you make the choice not to buy that thing, but allow other consenting adults to do the things that they want to do. But what about you, listeners? What do you think we should do to improve the prison system? Maybe you think it works just fine as it is. Comment it below if you actually can. You can't do that at freetalkcast.com, but you can on all of the other places, and there's probably a way for me to enable that. I just have to look into it. So leave us your comment, especially there on Patreon. Let us know what you think could be done to improve the prison system in the United States and whether or not it even needs to be improved. And thank you for listening. Same time next week. We'll see you then.